All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and yeah, Restream did something weird. They changed their. I use Restream so I can stream my live stream my podcast when it's live to both YouTube and Facebook at the same time, and it really works very well, and it has worked really well in the past, and it's free, although they put their little brand on it. Unfortunately, they made a change to their interface. And I don't know whether, it confused me in some fashion. And so I am streaming. I can see we're going out there. We're on YouTube. So that's all that really counts in the end. But I would have liked it if you saw my logo, my thumbnail for the program. And that didn't come up across, at least on the title. But regardless, I'll put up the video edited version, which basically is just I take off the first 30 seconds or so where I have the countdown timer is basically the only real change I make, unless there's some other glitch or bad audio or something. Otherwise, basically the recording is identical to what you watch when you watch me live. 240-242-5646. Obviously, the news would be the election. That's what we're going to talk about pretty much the whole program. And yeah, I was up until 2:30 in the morning here on the East Coast because we get the results weren't in until then. Although it was pretty clear, I think, by midnight that Trump was going to win. And first of all, color me very surprised. I had predicted on this program right here that I thought starting last week I was talking about why I believed Harris would win, and it had nothing to do with my wishes. It had nothing to do with anything but my looking at polls. And I understand the polls showed a super tight race, but again, there was a late break in Michigan. There was a day where there were 3 or 4 polls released. They all showed Harris with a decent lead, and these were good polls, good quality polls. And then it seemed to be confirmed by the weekend Des Moines Register Seltzer poll, which showed Harris with a lead in Iowa, and she lost Iowa, I think, by 10 points. I mean, she got thumped. It was a bad night for the Democrats. It was a particularly bad night for Harris. Bad night for the Democratic establishment. And my big disappointment. I mean, look, I didn't want either one to win, so I'm obviously not happy that Trump won. Am I more unhappy that he won than if Harris had won? Yeah, I am, because the Senate flipped, which I think was foreseeable, and also now we are worried that the House will likely flip too. But the voters don't like Democrats. I mean, I think the bottom line we have to come to acknowledge is that voters don't like Democratic candidates. They don't like Democratic elite anointed candidates. They like candidates who speak to them plainly, sincerely, who answer questions. And that's not Donald Trump. That's not Donald Trump. I think what you have to take away from this election more than anything else is that Donald Trump is just not, is that even a candidate as bad as Donald Trump can win when up against a sort of a feckless, vapid Democrat without really any accomplishments. When people would talk about what Kamala Harris had done, it was her offices, right? She had been elected district attorney. She was attorney general of the state of California. She was a senator. I mean, that all sounds fine. I mean, yeah, she won races, but what has she done? What did she do for the American people? And there just wasn't an answer to that. There never was, nor was there ever an answer to the question, what will you do for the American people? It was basically, we're going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And that's not what we wanted to hear. That's so clearly not what we wanted to hear. And so she lost. I mean, it's just that simple. If you want to join me, I'd love to talk to you about this. 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Forgot to test it. Forgot to test the sound system here to make sure that it would ring. So I got to do that, which is a big pain, but I will do it. And hopefully if you call, get you. That's why I'm looking over to the side here. And I'm going to get into, by the way, yeah, you may have heard of the ring. I don't know. Before we get to it, I'm not going to change my basic show structure, which is where I first and foremost center victims of American empire, American militarism, and that of our closest, tightest ally. You know, John Fetterman said, I don't have the video here, but I think he said either last night or he said in the run-up to the election, he was talking about how many Jewish voters were not feeling Kamala, and his suggestion was maybe she's not pro-Israel, not pro-Zionist enough, maybe she's not pro-genocide enough, was his implication. And then he said, you know, I'm always with Israel. And the response from the commentator, not directly to Fetterman, but my response was, well, aren't you supposed to be American? Aren't you supposed to be with America, not with Israel? I think that's something that's a real problem. And that's what was the difference between Harris and Trump on that. She's clearly beholden to the genocidal Israeli state, Jewish state, and that's why many voters weren't feeling it, didn't want to vote for her. And it's a horrible situation where we're all, I think, feeling a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. We all feel, I just can't believe as a nation there isn't a deep sense of discomfort, of foreboding with respect to the fact that we are behind genocide. We are funding it. We are supporting it. And she would not separate herself from that Biden policy for whatever reason. Anyone who says, well, Trump would be even worse, maybe Republican voters don't care as much. I think some do. I think they really do. But they saw that the Democrat is actually responsible. She was in the room. If you believed, if your argument to me was you got to vote for Harris because Trump's worse on Israel, because she can't break with Biden, she can't throw her boss under the bus. I think that's what maybe Joy Reid said. I'm not sure. Somebody said that last night. If that's your position, well, now the election's over. It's in the books. Biden and Harris are going to be in office for another couple months, a little more than that. This is their opportunity, right? There's no reason, nothing to stop them from cutting Israel off. I haven't heard of any order to do that. Have you? Have you heard anyone say we're going to stop right now? No more weapons to Israel while I'm president? Have you heard Kamala Harris give a speech? I don't know that she's conceded yet, but I'm not aware of any speech by Kamala Harris announcing that she is calling on President Biden to immediately cease the delivery of any weaponry whatsoever to Israel. I haven't heard that. How about a statement that we will no longer, as long as Biden's president, shield Israel in the United Nations? Wouldn't that be pretty cool if that happened? If your argument, if you're going to say to me, well, Hal, the problem is that Harris couldn't, come clean about what her real plans were to stand up to Bibi because she was afraid she'd alienate voters, she might lose important Jewish support. Well, if that's your position, then now you must believe, you must think she's going to stop all support for Israel, since she can without any negative implications. I'll believe it when it happens. I don't have death count. I don't have numbers from Gaza at this point. They haven't come out. They weren't published as the time I was ready to, I needed it for this program. But the news continues to be horrific. It's awful. Our weapons our bombs are falling on Beirut. Smoke is rising over that once beautiful city. Israel's telling people there to leave, get the hell out, evacuate. 20 people killed on the coast there, on the Mediterranean coast. I'm waiting for that compassionate, empathic, caring Kamala, because now's the time. Nothing should be stopping her from going to Joe Biden, from publicly demanding an end to all support for Israel. Are we going to see it? Again, I'll believe it when I see it. And until then, no, I will not. All right, 240-242-5646. Call and you want to talk about the election. I'm sure many of you do. I'd love to have your thoughts, why you think Harris lost. My title, and I'll get to it in just a moment, just real quick, the numbers. I don't have a death count, tragically. I don't have the numbers. They just haven't counted them up, or at least published them yet. So we have the same numbers we did yesterday, 43,391 Gazans, 17 killed Monday. I'm not sure. I also announced there had been 55 killed yesterday morning, so that would have been Tuesday. So I think the count must be well over 44,000, but it hasn't been released. All right, let's get to the election. I want to show you, this is the actual headline I used for my thumbnail. Trump triumphs. And I also had a title in there I wanted to share with you and go over a little bit, because I thought it was kind of interesting. The post-mortem, which Democrats never want to engage in post-mortem, certainly not to point the finger at themselves. I actually have heard more from Republicans. For example, if Donald Trump had lost, there would have been fingers pointed at him, and rightly so, for his crudeness, his boorishness, his crass behavior. So I think Republicans will, on occasion, criticize their own. It doesn't seem like Democrats will do that. I call this the Democratic loss has many parents. And that is because we can point the finger at a lot of people. There's a lot of blame to go around. And on this program, I'm going to spread it. But yeah, the Democratic loss has many parents, and I got that from, I was looking that up, trying to figure out where did that quote come from. So this was John F. Kennedy, victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. That was apparently paraphrasing Mussolini, right, the fascist. The Italian early 20th century fascist apparently said something similar, and Kennedy was channeling him when he made that statement. In this case, I don't want the Democrats to be allowed to evade blame, to evade responsibility, to point fingers at everyone else, which they almost certainly will. Let's go to Joy Reid. She's going to point the finger. She's not shy about it. She has a very specific group of people in mind for whom who she attributes the loss, that she's so upset about. And I do think it's odd, right? I mean, isn't the first person you should blame when an election is lost the candidate? There was so much effort in 2016 to figure out someone other than Hillary Clinton to attribute her loss, to explain her loss, which I find so strange because she's the one who lost. So wouldn't she be the one you'd legitimately blame? Well, that's not Joy Reid. Here she is.
So it was, it's a state that I think Democrats definitely were reaching for. There was a lot of work to try to turn out the college.
This is North Carolina she's talking about right here. Why Harris lost North Carolina.
Campuses, which were really thick and really packed, and try to turn out the suburbs. And I think there was a lot of hope because of just the insanity, can we say fairly, of the person who's running for governor in that state, and a thought that, defeating him would also carry Harris in. But in the end, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears.
I love the little from Rachel. Rachel Maddow right there. Oh, it is? Okay. Like to sort of like an emphasis. And we're going to get into what the evidence just doesn't support that claim. That somehow it's, a racial divide, that there was racism. This is a commonplace. This is what you're going to hear from other Democratic explainers, apologists, whatever term you want to use. It's racism, but the numbers just don't support that. We'll get into it. But even to the extent that there was a gulf, obviously more, her strongest support, Harris's strongest support did come from black women. But that can go two ways. It could certainly be that there's racism, that white voters and non-black voters who, might be brown, might be Asian, but not black, decided they don't want to vote for a black woman, or either consciously or subconsciously, probably more likely subconsciously. That could certainly be part of it. But the flip side of that is that black women may have said, hey, she is an African, she's ultimately an African American woman. I'm an African American woman. I believe she's on my side. I'm going to vote for her, even if the evidence doesn't support that interpretation. People do vote based on identity, both pro and con. So for Joy Reid to throw it all on white women because they didn't recognize what a great ally Kamala was, is only half the possible story, half the explanation, assuming there was some major disparity between how white women and black women voted for Harris. Also, there's an underlying assumption that women are supposed to vote with other women, that somehow women are going to be better for women, and that their only possible reason anyone would have voted for Trump was nefarious. A lot of you believe that. You can't fathom why someone would vote for Trump. I'm going to tell you, there's so much dissatisfaction, there's so much anger at the Democratic Party for a variety of reasons. And so much of it is justified. People have they're right to be mad at the Democrats. And if your response is, well, they should be mad at the Republicans too. Okay. So what? What your point would be what? We have two awful parties. Let's create a better one. Let's build a better one. Let's establish one that is on the side of the people. Because that's not what we have now. And that is why Kamala Harris lost.
That is what it appears happened in that state, is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks. Yep. But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, re-electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And, God bless Shannon Watts, who has tried to have that conversation. But if people aren't receptive to it, and if people vote more party line or more on race.
All right, so I'll just stop it there because it's interesting what you said about the patriarchy. Where in Kamala Harris's record, except for her sex, has she demonstrated any eagerness, any willingness to take on the patriarchy? She hasn't. Her policies have been always Because to me, what is taking on the patriarchy? It would mean you support pro-people policies, pro-environment policies, anti-corporate, anti-military, right? Isn't that what the idea is, that women, they're more concerned about children, they're life givers, they're caregivers. The patriarchy is men at the top making decisions that are often, they're not human-centered. They're not humane. They're emotionless. They're soulless. That's the patriarchy. And where do we have in either because remember, I guess what Joyanne Reed just said is that white women, not black women, white women have had this opportunity to vote for two women who were, thereby taking on the patriarchy. But both of those two women embody the patriarchy. They're totally pro-military. They're totally pro-corporate elites. I would feel differently, very differently about this argument if Kamala Harris had been somebody who really was going to shake things up and address wealth and income inequality, address empire. But she's not. She's made it clear over and over and over and over again that that's not who she is. It's probably true. I believe it. There may be some voters who, white women voters, white male voters, Asian voters, Latino voters, maybe some black voters who were uncomfortable with the idea of a black woman president. I don't deny it. But since we have much more obvious explanations for people's refusal to vote for her, I think we should go to those first, right? Rather than assuming the worst in people, especially in the American electorate that voted to give Barack Obama the biggest majority win since Ronald Reagan. And he got more votes than any president, I guess, ever. I don't know, maybe he was surpassed because of the population growth. But certainly the difference, he won by significant majority of votes, which also looks like Trump will probably get too, although his majority may be largely wiped out in California, obviously, but it looks like he'll get a majority. All right, 240-242-5646. So if it's the fault of white women, which is not exactly the way Joyanne Reed phrased it, but she was a little bit more subtle. But basically saying, hey, black women get it. How come white women don't? I guess because it's a black woman who's running. That argument runs smack into this fact. 1 in 3 people of color voted for Trump. GOP makes inroads in historic Democratic strongholds. And according to this exit poll, and that's all we can really go by. Well, it's not all. I'll explain something else in a moment in terms of what different ethnic and racial groups, how they voted. You have to go by exit polls because obviously nobody knows specifically how any individual voter voted. But according to the exit polls, all people of color, the groups of color, that sounds pretty awkward, but that's the best I got, actually moved towards Trump, whereas white voters moved away from Trump. It's hard for me to credit the argument that there was racism or racism was a significant factor in the Trump victory when he got less support from white voters than he has in the past, and he got more support from voters of color than he got in the past. And before I show you that chart, I just want to make one other point. This was something that CNN, which by the way does by far the best election coverage, I think, without, it's close. But this was something that I guess John King and maybe Tapper, but probably was more likely King, pointed out. And he did point out several times that cities and counties in Pennsylvania that had disproportionately high percentages of Latino voters, including Puerto Rican voters. Pennsylvania, the third most populous Puerto Rican population in the country. And I even opined last week that Trump's comics joke about the floating island of garbage would hurt Trump. Well, maybe it hurt him. He would have won by an even bigger margin among Puerto Ricans, because cities like Allentown, which have a very high percentage of Latinos, apparently a high percentage of Puerto Ricans, went for Trump. Trump did really well in precincts, counties, cities that were disproportionately Puerto Rican specifically, or Latino more generally. I don't know how you can look at that and claim that there's some sort of racism involved in the in the vote. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And here's from the NBC exit polls. So Trump's white support, I had to look at this about 1 million times. I couldn't really figure out how this worked, but I'll explain it. So the exit polls showed that Trump's white support went down. He had gotten 58% of the white vote in 2020 when he lost to Biden, a white candidate. He had 58% against another white man. Against a woman of color, Trump's support went down to 55%. So he got a majority, but it wasn't like a huge majority by any means. And he also, Trump lost 3% of the white vote compared to where he was in 2020. And Harris got 2% more white voters than her President Biden did. So that kind of throws a big monkey wrench. Now, I know Harris, strike that, Joy-Ann Reid was only talking about the count in North Carolina. But the idea that she was, she was clearly trying to extrapolate from that it's white women who don't, want to vote for a black woman. But you lose that argument when you look at the polls that show no. White voters actually were less inclined to vote for Trump when he was running against Harris. She went around with Liz Cheney, and that clearly did make a difference among white voters. The problem is it didn't help her at all. It probably hurt her. That style of campaigning hurt her significantly with voters of color. So let me get that back up because I want to show you the black vote for a second. Because this was the other, it wasn't a big difference. So she did, meaning Harris, she lost a tiny smidge. This is assuming the accuracy of these exit polls, which you can't be too clear about. But there was a lot of chatter that Trump was doing better among black male voters. And according to this, we don't know. We don't really know because it doesn't break it down by sex. But according to the exit polls here, Trump, and maybe I need to go back and look at it, I probably should, Trump actually saw the support he got from black voters steady. It stayed steady, 12%, whereas Harris lost 1%. So black voters actually supported her in slightly smaller numbers than they had supported Biden. So it's pretty amazing when you think about it. To me, if that's accurate, if that's true, in other words, if Harris got slightly less support among black voters than Biden did, then there must be a lot of dissatisfaction with her and with Democrats in general community. Because you've got a black candidate woman of color, African American, African Indian, whatever you want to call her, Blasian, Black Asian, whatever term you want to use, it's historic. And she has Barack Obama campaigning for her. She has Bill Clinton campaigning for her. She can't improve on an old, stale, pale male Joe Biden's performance. She can't do better than that. It tells you something, doesn't it? It tells you that black voters were not enamored with Kamala Harris. They didn't find her to be some great, historic figure that was going to usher in a better world. Not at all. Let's look at the other groups that are subsumed within this voters of color exit poll by NBC. Latino voters broke hard for Trump. His support with Latinos went up from 32% to 45%. This is why he won, by the way. That is why he won. More than any other reason, that strong break from Latino voters. Asians supported Trump in greater numbers. And then other, which I was wondering about that other. Who's other? So I'm going to assume that's indigenous peoples, maybe Native Americans, perhaps, I don't know, other South Pacific Islanders, indigenous peoples. He actually won a majority, according to this exit poll. It's probably a very small number of total voters. So, again, the numbers may or may not be accurate. But the bottom line is Trump had broader appeal to a wider swath of voters than we've seen any Republican in a long time. Maybe George W. Bush. George W. Bush had Latino support. I don't know that he had 45%. You got to grapple with that. You want to blame racism, ignorance, what have you. You got to grapple with this. Democrats need to accept that they're doing a lot of things wrong. It isn't just a bunch of boobs out there who don't know their R's from their elbow. I know that's the preferred narrative, but it just doesn't comport with the reality. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. This is from Butch Ware. He was the Green Party vice presidential candidate running with Jill Stein. And I was thinking about this. He posted this today, but he had been saying this for quite a while. I've heard him say this on various podcasts and other videos. Kamala was always unelectable. $1 billion wasted trying to blackwash a genocide. Team Blue doesn't elect candidates. It appoints and anoints them, then looks surprised when they get curb stomped. They will never recover from this. They're going the way of the Whigs. Well, I kind of was like, wishing that were true. And he may well be right that she was always unelectable, but I'm going to get into some criticisms of what Ware says. And he had always been pointing to various polling that showed that her support among black voters was thin. That was Ware's argument from day one. Black voters don't like her. She doesn't have enough support from black voters. If you look at the exit polls, actually, she did better among black voters. She certainly lost them to a much lesser degree than she lost any other group except for whites. Both parties are traitors, says Bush had 28% support. Thank you for that number there, both parties, because, I was confident Trump is more popular among Latinos than any other recent Republican candidate, including W. All right, Kamala's always unelectable. Yeah, I'm not going to, it's easy to say that in retrospect. Although, to be fair to Ware, he said it prospectively as well. But I really, just to get into this a little bit more, $1 billion wasted. This is so fair. That is there was so much energy and effort put into electing and money put into electing Harris. And it was all wasted. Now, you want corporate money, right? All those billionaires, because she got a lot of billionaire support. Reed Hastings, right? The guy from Netflix. Is that his name? I think it is. There was a lot of Soros money involved. Mark Cuban. So they all gave a lot of money, right? I don't care, right? Too bad. You flush your own money down the toilet, I don't give a crap. Here's what frustrates me to no end. A lot of progressive groups, self-described progressive groups were raising money on her and then pouring canvassing efforts, going out door knocking for her. That was money, time, and energy that could have been spent building an emerging party movement, trying to get us away from this horrific unitary party. Just a real quick response to Shade there, PT. It appears you restarted your stream and left the old preview pane up to fool us into thinking you were just late starting your show. You have to find a better system. You know, it wasn't, and I explained this before, so Shade, you missed this, but I explained this before. Restream changed its system, and I thought I had it ironed out. But you're welcome for your understanding. I feel like the system was working pretty good. There's a lot of issues. The system that I'm doing this, I think, is pretty good, so I'm not gonna beat myself up. But yes, I was disappointed that I don't have the new thumbnail, and I will post the video with the editing afterwards and take down the portion of it. So yeah, $1 billion trying to blackwash a genocide. What a terrible, terrible thing that was done. She was an awful candidate. She's not just a bad candidate, not just somebody who refused to ever answer questions or put out what her real beliefs were, but she backed really awful policies. And yet the progressive movement, groups I mentioned over and over again, PDA, Progressive Democrats of America, Our Revolution, group I worked at, the climate defiance folks, they're door knocking for her. A lot of DSA people. Now, I don't think DSA actually officially sponsored any efforts, but DSA people did put their time and energy into trying to elect her. In Maryland, there's a group called CCAN, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, to fight the climate holocaust. They were constantly sending out fundraising emails trying to get people to go to Pennsylvania to door knock for Harris. What a terrible waste of money. Even if she had won, you'd have got nothing for your efforts. But that money could have been spent, that time, that energy could have spent into building a viable third party, emerging party movement would have been so much better. I was like, your argument there doesn't really work. Butch, though, when you say, this is the problem I have with it. He says, let me just sort of back up a little bit because I lost my thread a little bit. So we're in rightly condemning the time, energy, effort put into electing a losing candidate when he always was sure was going to lose. He says at the end, the Democrats are done. They can't recover. They're going the way of the Whigs. Well, the Whigs were supplanted by the Republican Party. And presumably, Ware is saying the Greens will be the new Republicans, right? We'll take over. The Republicans were the party that ended slavery. We're going to be the party that's going to end the two-party corporate duopoly. And I would love it if it were true. I love it if it were accurate. But it's not. It's Jade, I'll clear it all up just so to respond to you in the chat. I will clear it all up after the program. Right now, I'm just going to do this and get the video done, talk about the election. But yeah, there was a problem there, and hopefully it won't happen again. It's a little confusing. Again, Restream messed me up this morning. I was really frustrated. I was really irritated, frankly, when I saw how Restream had changed its interface. I strongly feared, I suspected something would go wrong, and indeed it did. Okay, back to the Greens. I would be able to take you more seriously as the new Republicans supplanting the Democrats' Whigs if you had done better than 0.4%. 0.4%. That's nationwide. That is so bad. What a terrible, terrible performance. I think the Greens did worse this election than they did in 2016, when they were roundly and I think incorrectly blamed for torpedoing Hillary. Not that I care if they did. I mean, that's fine. She's a bad candidate. She should have lost. It's okay. But the problem is, so was Trump. The Greens it was a terrible night for the Greens. So that's disappointing. And you might say, well, the Greens really were focused on the swing states. Their real goal was to take support from Hillary. They wanted to appeal to the especially Michigan Arab population. And I understand that, right? You want to be a player. You're a player, you take votes away from a candidate, votes that could cost her the election. I understand the theory. The problem is it didn't really work, even in Michigan. 0.8% of the vote, 0.8%. So where you guys got to do something differently too. Now, this is where I am more inclined to blame voters. Because clearly, just like I blame Democratic 2020 primary voters for Joe Biden winning the nomination rather than Bernie. And certainly in 2016, Democratic primary voters are the reason Trump won in 2016, because if you were one and didn't vote for Bernie, you put an unelectable candidate on the ballot. Hillary Clinton was unelectable. You can't blame primary voters in this election because there weren't any on the Democratic side. There were, but what? Marianne Williamson? Who was that guy? Some congressman, I don't remember his name, and then RFK Jr. for a hot second before he became a Republican. The Greens did terribly. They really did. It's really a disappointing result, I have to say. Trump will probably win Michigan. He'll win it with some of those Muslim votes. Very unfortunate. I said. So what I say to you, Butch Ware, figure out a way to build the Green Party. And I'll be there with you. I'm going to be fighting for the Green Party. Do you think there's going to be some soul searching from the Democrats? Do you see that? We already saw that Joy Reid isn't prepared to question anything Kamala Harris did. She lost because white women didn't support her. Because racist, she doesn't use the word racist, but she all but says racist white women didn't vote for her. That's Joy Reid, the MSNBC pundit. Of course, Rachel's right there with her. I don't want to just blame, just say, oh, this is just Reid. She's sort of an outlier. I mean, Rachel's like, yes, of course. It's those racist white women. Here's Ro Khanna. So we have a Democratic pundit, Democratic shill, Joy Reid. We also have a Democrat elected, Ro Khanna. Let's hear what he has to say on MSNBC.
California.
We're hopeful. We're hopeful for 3 pickups in California.
So Khanna's talking about how maybe they'll keep the Congress, right? They'll keep Congress. Is his hope. It doesn't look good right now. I really hope the Democrats do, because I don't want Trump to have a blank slate, to have just have his way with the legislature however he wants. So I really hope the Congress stays blue.
Of difference if we have Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House or if we have Mike Johnson. I serve.
All right, so this is where immediately Ro Khanna goes off the rail. And anyone who believes that the Democrats, the progressive Democrats, that Ro Khanna is somehow on your side, the first thing he does is start extolling Hakeem Jeffries, who is just horrible, right? Hakeem Jeffries pushing through every single aid package desired by the White House for either Israel or Ukraine. Hakeem Jeffries pushing through the Mountain Valley Pipeline, pushing through the Willow Creek carbon bomb, pushing through legislation to outlaw railway strikes. And Ro Khanna's there tooting his horn. This corporate Democratic Congress member's horn. This Wall Street Dems horn. You can't, we need to go in a different direction, folks. If Khanna were prepared to actually really question why the Democrats lost, he would never bring the specter of Hakeem Jeffries to the table as a positive. Hakeem Jeffries is a big problem for the Democrats. His policies, the backroom deals, the tight, close-knit relationships he has with Wall Street banksters, fraudsters, with the genocidal state of Israel. And yet Khan is saying, oh no, we need Hakeem Jeffries. It's clear they're not prepared to do any soul searching, any change in their business as usual. All right, 240-242-5646. I know there's some comments. I'm sorry, both parties are traitors and shade. And anyone else, if you post, I just can't really keep looking at those. I got my slides I got to do. But I do want to hear from you. So if you call in, yes, you will get priority, and I will absolutely take your call. Okay, let's go to the Young Turks. Every now and then, Cenk kind of fools me, or maybe goes the other way, and his true colors come out, and he says something I like, and he's actually prepared to hold power maybe a tiny little bit accountable. By the way, there you go. Subscribe, please. Let's get those subscription numbers up. I see some new people posting. I love that. So I'd love to get some more, of course, more subscribers. The more, the merrier. Here's Cenk, and he's getting into it a little bit with Representative Steve Cohen, a Democrat from Tennessee. So listen and see what you think.
This guy's IQ is barely in the double digits. This guy's is
You're talking about his IQ?
Yeah, and
It's barely in the double digits.
yeah.
Right. So Cenk says, his joke is how Trump's barely got a double-digit IQ. And then Cohen's like, yeah, Trump, he's got a double-digit IQ. So he's just basically repeating himself. It's a freaking frack routine they got going on. But then listen to Cenk's question here, actually.
And so Donald Trump is, like, in my opinion, a deranged clown, a buffoon of a man. And
He is a buffoon. I don't disagree. I think that's fair. He is also a narcissist. He's also pathetic. That's who the Democrats lost to. So Cenk kind of nails Trump. Here's the question.
How does that make the Democratic Party if you lose to him twice?
Well, it may be the American electorate, because
Okay.
the votes.
So, I mean, doesn't that just make your head explode? Cenk says to him, this guy, we both agree he's not bright. We both agree he's not really stable, right? He's not. We agree. And yet you can't beat him. What does that say about you? So is this the time for soul searching? Well, I guess maybe we have been a little too pro-corporate. Maybe we haven't really fought for workers. Maybe all of our military adventures are coming home to bite us from the people who we keep sending overseas to fight and die for the United States, or whose money we're whose income we tax to send to Ukraine to kill people and to Israel to bomb and destroy civilizations. Maybe that's a problem, you think? So what's Steve Cohen's answer? It's amazing. Let's play it again. This is why Democrats suck. This is why you got to vote for somebody other than a Democrat.
Buffoon of a man. And so what does that make the Democratic Party if you lose to him twice?
Well, it may be the American electorate, because he got the votes. Some of them were people that were selfish and greedy, and they wanted better tax rates.
They're all selfish and greedy. Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. This privileged man, this privileged individual, he's got a lot of power, a lot of influence. It's just those ignoramus voters. They don't know. They're just selfish. It's kind of ironic for him to say, maybe he didn't look at that exit poll data that shows more and more people of color moved to Trump. Are they all privileged? Those hardworking Latino immigrants and their kids who are voting for Trump? They're just privileged people. The people in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the people across the heartland that's been destroyed by free trade policies championed both by Republicans, not by Trump, and Democrats. But they don't know these people don't know what's good for them. We know what's good for them.
Back to their kids who are the Lucky Sperm Club, but it might
again, that is so, the people who vote for Trump, they're the members of the Lucky Sperm Club. That's your Democratic answer. Those of you, I got a lot of heat. How could you not vote for Harris? How could you tell people to vote for Jill Stein? So my question to you is, all you people, are you mad at her? Are you mad at the Democrats? I mean, I know there's a lot of, I don't love the term Trump derangement syndrome because there's good reason to really not like Donald Trump. He did some really bad things. He's made really scary threats. I can understand. I think there's legitimate reason to be worried, concerned, afraid even of a Trump presidency. Not a Trump pregnancy, but a Trump presidency. There's good reason to be afraid of that. No question. So I don't say it's Trump derangement syndrome exactly. But for those of you who view him as this, and it's fair, he's an existential threat. Problem is, so is Harris. But for those of you who say, well, and by the way, I got a little itch there. Sorry, folks. He's an existential threat, right? So aren't you mad at the Democrats for saddling us with Harris, for campaigning on a more of the same when the electorate wants something different? Aren't you angry at the institutions, the so-called progressive left, that was all in for Harris and spent all that energy, money, time, and got nothing out of it? I sure am. I sure as hell am. Okay, so back to revisiting the Democrats are toxic. Americans really, really can't stand Democrats. It's just so much insincerity. There's so much. I think it's an insincerity, the hypocrisy. People say about Trump, whatever you, and I think he's full of crap. I don't think he's honest. He's totally a grifter. No question. But he presents himself as a flim-flammer. Right? I mean, you're like, okay, he's a used car salesman. We know that. But the Democrats present themselves as these champions of the people, these highly educated, but at the same time, truly progressive folks who are going to make things better. And they don't. They don't. They're smiling at you. They're nodding. They're recognizing your pain at the same time as they got their hands in your pocket. People hate that. And they blame all Democrats for that. So here's The Guardian. Republicans retake control of U.S. Senate after Democrats lose majority. I was disappointed. I certainly did want Sherrod Brown to get reelected. I don't love Sherrod Brown. I don't think no Democrat speaks out against the establishment. No Democrat speaks out against the party apparatchiks, the leadership, against Obama. None of them against Biden, against Hillary. They won't do it. And I think that's a huge problem for the party. But I also think Sherrod Brown is probably about as good a Democrat as you'll find. But it's not good enough because, there's the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. And if you're in the same flock as Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries and Hillary Clinton, people are going to think you're just the same as they are. And you're going to lose. It's just that simple. It really is. It's not a lot to it. It's not complex. All right, I'm going to probably break off a little after 1. I'm not going to go on forever. I'm really tired. I told you I was up late. And because of this election. This was really interesting news because you heard Joanne Reed saying that white women didn't recognize how they need Harris to protect their right to choose. And of course, the Democrats haven't been there. The Democrats have used the issue politically for political reasons, but they haven't actually, ever really protected the right to choose. Except, and I give it, that when you have a president who's Democratic, they nominate pro-choice justices. It is true, but they haven't passed legislation to protect the right to choose. So this is from the post-election, or not post, but the election blogging at the New York Times. And so this guy, Benjamin Applebaum, writes, referendums to protect access to abortion, by the way, shouldn't that be referenda? I don't know. To protect access to abortion appear to be headed for victory. This was quite a surprise to me. 4 red states, Arizona, Montana, Nebraska, and Missouri, all of them, the people there said, we're going to protect at least some access to abortion. This can be a winning issue for Democrats, but Harris kind of leaned into it a little bit, but probably not as much as she should have. And it's also not the most important issue. Yes, people have put it on the ballot. They'll vote for choice. But you know what they care most about, honestly, and I said this from day, jobs. You're going to bring back good, fair paying, living wage jobs. That's what Democrats, more than anything else, that could be their winning issue. Harris didn't talk about that. Trump, by the way, did. Tariffs. What do you think tariffs are? Bring back industry to this country. They've given up this issue. They ceded a really what could have been a winning issue for them. So abortion, actually, voters even in red states, dead red, blood red states, choose choice when they have an opportunity. And in Florida, 57% of the voters, it needed 60 to win that referendum, said, no, we want to have abortion protected, I think, at least in the first trimester, maybe even longer. This could have been a winning. The Democrats had a lot they could have won. But they had a terrible candidate and they kicked it all away. One of the arguments I think is so phony, so disingenuous, is that this is Joe Biden's fault somehow. That, if he had only, withdrawn earlier, he just get people. So here, this is from the New York Times again. I want to just put this up there. In a way, it's fair, right? I mean, Biden I guess he should have withdrawn earlier. Of course he should have withdrawn earlier. But the Democrats could have also said to him, the Democrats should have said, we're going to have a real primary. We are. They shouldn't have it was the Democrat Party that cleared everyone out, that kept anyone from challenging Biden. So this guy, David French, is another, one of the Republicans at the New York Times. Blame attaches to Biden far more than it does to Harris. But Biden's team didn't level with the American people about his own condition. Had he stepped aside and allowed a real primary, would we be in a different position? I think you might be, yeah. I think it was a big problem that Harris was correctly viewed as an anointed candidate, one who the people didn't choose. The Democrat Party didn't choose. But it wasn't up to Biden to determine whether there's a real primary. The Democratic candidate, people who were interested, Gavin Newsom, he could have run. He could have said, I'm going to challenge Biden. He could have said, right, this guy's too old. He's too feeble-minded. He can't do it. We need somebody young, strong, vibrant like me. He could have done that. He didn't. It's not Biden's fault. That's not Biden's fault. Harris lost the election because she's a bad candidate. Harris lost the election because the Democratic Party protected her at every turn. Because nobody said to her, you've got to answer questions. People want to know, are you going to cut Israel off at some point or aren't you? You don't. I guess she said she wouldn't, right? Okay, well then someone needed to tell her that's a losing strategy. That's not what the American public wants. That's not what the Democratic base wants. People want to hear what you're going to do differently than Joe Biden. You can't just say you're not going to do you're going to do everything exactly the same. If that's what you're going to do, you're going to lose the election. If that's what you're going to say, you're going to lose the election. That's what people had to say to her, and they didn't. Harris is the one who lost. Joe Biden didn't lose. Kamala Harris lost. She's the one to blame for the loss more than any other. It's easy to, it's clear. All right, I wanted just a couple of quick things to put up there, because I was looking at that New York Times election blog, and I just couldn't believe the kind of, they're so clueless about how they come across, these New York Times reporters. And there was not one who supported Trump. There was not one. As far as I know, in 2020, there wasn't one New York Times columnist who supported Bernie. So this is Farrah Stockman talking about the Gaza genocide. And she mentions Lydia Polgreen. Lydia, earlier you mentioned Gaza. Trump has been going around Dearborn portraying himself as a peacemaker and the guy who can stop the war. We might find that ridiculous, but we shouldn't estimate. It's like they treat it's like they're looking at an aquarium. The people in the heartland in Michigan, they're in the fishbowl for the New York Times journalists, the Ivy League educated, fancy pants writers to look at and sort of examine and dissect. That's how they come across. So as ridiculous as it might be that Trump is calling himself a peacemaker, actually, some of those boobs, the bourgeoisie in the heartland, actually might buy it. And it's unfortunate because the Democrats are actually vulnerable to accusations that their party is the party of war. It's so unfortunate. Well, you know what? It's true. It is the party of war. Why the hell don't you just say that and say this is why they lose? And I give her some credit. She did bring it up. To soldiers who feel betrayed. This is such an interesting line, too. To soldiers who feel betrayed by the Iraq War, campaigning with Liz Cheney or championing democracy abroad might land differently. Well, this is what I don't understand. I get it that if you were lost a leg in Iraq, or your, wife was killed by an IED, you probably wouldn't really like Liz Cheney very much, right? But here's what and also just to champion democracy abroad is hilarious, because we don't champion democracy abroad, neither Democrats nor Republicans. We do just the opposite. We undermine and subvert democracies. Whether it was in Haiti, when Hillary Clinton kiboshed any kind of economic justice referendum that would have just allowed for a little bit better living standard for the women of color who make Hanes underwear and Levi's jeans. That's undermined democracy. Haiti had a president. She undermined their democracy. She hollowed out that country, and now it's a failed state. Or when she fomented a coup in Honduras, or when Obama destroyed Libya. Not a democracy. But we don't promote democracy. So that's a lie to present it that way. But what I don't understand is how Stockman is saying Yeah, you and I, we get it. It's really great that she's out there, that Kamala was out there with Liz Cheney. That's a real good thing. That's a positive, right? But people who, maybe fought for our country, maybe they wouldn't see it that way. How the hell do you see it that way? That's what I want to know, Farrah Stockman. How the hell do you see it as a positive to be out with Liz Cheney? All right, I could just go on and on, but I'm not going to. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of Halitics to the extent you were, and I'll see you on the 7th.